Confirm, Mr. Chair, you are live.
Thank you very much, Krista. I'd like to, good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Audit and Finance Standing Committee for April 20th, 2022. I'm Paul Russell, representing Lower Sackville. And I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is 10:03 a.m. And to start off with, I'd like to acknowledge that the Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional and unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. And as is standard with these virtual meetings, I'd like to run through the committee members and just make sure that everybody's audio and video are in order. So let's start with District 1, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, colleagues and staff. All set, ready to go on a beautiful sunny day.
Oh, good stuff. And Councillor Hensby, District 2, good morning.
Hello there, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Look forward to a very productive meeting today. Let's illuminate on those streetlights.
There we go. Thank you. And Councillor Purdy, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good to be here. Looking forward to our meeting.
Good stuff. Thank you. And Councillor Cleary, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, colleagues, public.
Morning. And Councillor Morse, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and colleagues and staff. All set to go here from Clayton Park.
Good stuff. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of March 9th, 2022. Can I have a motion to approve those minutes, please?
So moved.
Councillor Cleary, thank you. A seconder?
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. Are there any errors or omissions? Not hearing any. All in favor of the minutes of March 9th, 2022, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. The next item is the approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Over to the clerk. Do we have any changes for today?
Mr. Chair, there are no additions or deletions from the clerk's office.
Okay, thank you very much, Krista. Can I have a motion for the approval of the order of business, please?
Mr. Chair, I'd move the order of business, but could 12.1.1 and 12.2.1 be moved to the end of the agenda, please?
Yes. Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. And do we have a seconder for that?
Second.
Councillor Cleary. Thank you. Are there any other changes from the committee? Okay, thank you. So we would have 12.1.1 after 12.2.4 and 12.2.1 immediately after that. All in favor of the agenda as amended, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. We have an agenda. The next item is business arising out of the minutes, and there is none. Call for declaration of conflicts of interest. And I don't see any. Motions of reconsideration, motions of rescission, consideration of deferred business, and notices of tabled matters, all are none. Next item is correspondence. Over to the clerk. Do we have any correspondence today?
Mr. Chair, no correspondence has been received from the clerk's office.
Okay, thank you. And do we have any petitions?
There are none.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see any from members of council. Thank you. There are no presentations today and no information items. So the next item on the agenda is 12.2.2, the investment activities for the quarter ended December 31st, 2021. And we have a motion. Do we have a presentation for that? I don't believe. I do see that we have a presentation.
Aaron,
Aaron?
Deputy Treasurer, through you, Mr. Chair, to the committee. There's no presentation for this report.
Okay. Okay. So we do have, can someone please put the motion on the floor? Go ahead, Councillor Cleary.
I will move that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee forward this report to Halifax Regional Council as an information item.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Purdy. Do we have any questions? Go ahead, Councillor Clary.
Just, I mean, I'm the last year and a half being on the Audit and Finance Committee, I'm always impressed at the portfolio, the management of it, and how our returns are usually much higher than the benchmarks. But I do have just a quick question. I don't know if staff have looked at this yet, because I do notice the returns are above the updated projection. Given interest rates just went up 50 basis points, and it's expected that they will continue, from the very historic lows we've been at, to go up moderately over the next number of months and year. Will an updated projection be coming? Do we expect the returns to grow that much more over the next 6 months next year?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the committee. So, yep, we've already updated our projections for this currently completed fiscal year to account for these increases. And going forward into the next fiscal year, we have also priced in these increases into the budget for the investment income. So right now we increased for the fiscal to 1.5 million from the original budget for the projections, and into this next fiscal year, including these projections and rate increases, we're estimating or projecting around $2 million of investment income. So we've already looked into this, and we will continue to keep track of any rate increases and build that into our future projections.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I don't see any further questions. So are we ready for the question?
Question.
Okay. All in favor of forwarding this to council as an information item, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is amendments to Administrative Order 2014-015 ADM. And I'm wondering, Jerry, you are on the call. Is there a presentation that goes along with this, or is this for discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, no presentation. This is just the admin order amendments, just to provide the overarching guidance to the changes in business cases that council approved back in November. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jerry. Councillor Hensby, would you be interested in putting the motion on the floor? I see that you've got your hand up.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee recommend the Halifax Regional Council adopt the amendments to Administrative Order 2014-01580 and the Financial Reserves Administrative Order is set out in Attachment 2 of this report.
Thank you very much. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bagel-Gammon. Go ahead, Councillor Hensby.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My concern are twofold. They talk about getting rid of the maximum or minimums, whatever, just to have a strategy for all these reserves. But I always thought there should always be a target amount. I don't know what to call that a maximum, but there should always be a target they should be striving to achieve and a balance. Because I hate to see these reserves become nothing but a squirrel away nest egg and stuff. I know we need them for rainy days, but there's some days some people are worried that we're banking too much money and that we should be trying to minimize the impact on the tax rates with that stuff. So, we've been blessed to have reserves of the last blessed to have surpluses of the last number of years, and we were able to replenish our reserves to a great degree. But I'm just concerned that removing the maximum, removing the minimums, I thought there should always be targets we should try to maintain. And my other question in regards to, it doesn't give a definition of a local emergency declaration, a state of emergency, because I've had in my district situations with wildfires and everything else. I'd like to know in regards to what they may consider as a local state of emergency. Could it be a chemical spill that causes evacuation? It could be a wildfire that causes an evacuation and shutdown of an area. Should it be a flood or heaven forbid, an earthquake in a particular zone? I just wish I had some clarification on those points as moving forward.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank you. Go ahead.
Councillor Jerry Blackwood, CFO. So, yeah, just on the mins and max, it's always something that kind of comes up, and reserves, as we've been very transparent on, is all about flexibility, right? And it's about putting money away for future investments and initiatives, and providing council with the flexibility to withdraw, right? So mins and maxes, there's no requirement with GAAP, general accepting accounting principles, or the municipal FRAM with respect to rules around mins and maxes. So what we look for is around flexibility, to have there with council around this, and that kind of ties into your question on targets, right? So, if you recall through the whole the last 6 months of budget, right, and reserves came up quite often. So, one of the things that we talked about quite extensively is our funding model around how we're going to fund strategic capital and capital going forward. Council just approved a $318 million capital plan. That requires planning. It requires stocking up reserves, as we talked about around Halifax. So, we are looking at the reserves in terms of the amount of money that we need to raise, and we need to sock away. For example, on Halifax, to meet our debt obligations in the future as these projects get delivered, right? So with regards to the business cases, there is governance built in terms of there's a requirement to review the reserves every year, and including balances, and to provide an annual report to council. So we've been doing those things. Reserves come back every quarter with the financial the quarter financial reports. They'll be coming back again when we wrap up our year end. Any surplus remaining, staff will make recommendations to council on where that money goes. And just with regards to a local emergency, so the AO was drafted with legal. So one of the things that was missing from there was if we had like a liquidity crisis. So for example, when COVID happened, we were everybody we planned for the worst and kind of hoped for the best. Obviously, we did not get into a situation where we had a liquidity crisis, but this is just good, prudent risk management. I would say that if there was a state of emergency called, and I think the trigger is under the mayor. If the mayor called a state of emergency, that would invoke delegation of powers from council around reserve spending and how we could use reserves to meet any liquidity requirements or any emergency situations, like you said, like, for example, a chemical spill.
Thank you, Jerry. Councillor Hensby, does that address your concerns? It does. Okay, thank you. Councillor Morse, go ahead.
No, well, I guess I wondered how we consider an emergency. So when council declared a climate emergency, that is not relevant, right? That doesn't relate to what we're talking about here. It has to be a state of emergency. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the spirit of the language in the administrative order. It would be around if the mayor declared a state of emergency.
Okay, so it wouldn't have any impact on the reserves we're trying to build up for Halifax and that sort of thing, what we're discussing here today?
No.
No, okay, great, thanks.
No. Okay, thank you. I would like to speak to this or ask a couple of questions or whatnot. So, Councillor Daigle-Gammon, if you wouldn't mind assuming the chair.
Certainly. Councillor Russell, do you have a question?
I have a couple. Thank you. I had a look at this, and I frankly have no problem with having maximums in place. If we remove maximums, then I see it as an opportunity. No, I see it as that there is a possibility of simply raising the taxes to feed whatever the amount is in the reserves. And I am not in favor of that. I'd rather see some limits around it. I had a look at section 11, and the concept that you're looking for as far as having extra powers or providing those extra powers through the mayor for a state of emergency, I think makes sense. I have a concern about what you're removing in order to insert a new section 11. And what you're removing is a statement that says staff shall not redesignate or transfer funds between reserves for short-term needs unless approved by council. So that takes some authority away from council. And I get that it might streamline the process, but I have concerns that council would not be a part of it, of transferring the amounts between the reserves. So if that is added back in, then that would help. As it is, I don't know that I would. No, I know that I wouldn't be able to support this. And then I do agree there is also some cleanup of the language now that we have added the executive director title, that it changes director of finance to executive director of finance. That's not a problem, but I do have concerns about. This is a new term, a funding emergency as well. So if that was changed to be a state of emergency, then I could support that. And if the language was added back in about redesignating or transferring funds between reserves, and if the maximums and minimums were kept in place, then I would be able to support it. I'm not going to make those changes, but I also am not going to be able to support these amendments to the administrative order as they are. So those are my comments.
So if I could just address, so I need to take it back to November when council did approve the business cases, right? So we move forward based on the decision that council made to draft the administrative order around the business cases that were approved. With regard to the emergency piece, so yeah, I mean, the mayor, I think it's under the Emergency Measures Act that the mayor can call, that, has the powers to call a state of emergency. So, it's just good governance. To your question, I'm just looking at the report here now. Let me bring it up. Yeah, that piece that we removed, it's kind of redundant language because, all reserves, transfers, and withdrawals shall, are approved by council, right? So, it basically says that down in 11B, right? Is basically nothing in the administrative order shall prevent council from withdrawing or contributing to a reserve, right? And 2, withdrawals and contributions to reserves are further regulated by the Halifax Municipality Charter, right? So I think, on when this was being drafted with finance and legal, that 11.1 was just looked at as redundant language. It does not take away any powers of council at all. Like all, with reserve withdrawals and funding plans are approved by council. It just removes like that, like it said in the short term, which is kind of redundant.
So we have a business case for each reserve, and the funding in that reserve is used for the purposes of that business case. And my read on this is it does remove notification of council, approval of council for this to happen. It doesn't prevent other things from happening. It just means that it doesn't have to come in front of council.
I think the solicitor wanted to weigh in on this one, so I'll defer to John. Mr. Chair.
Maybe Jerry, you want to talk about, I mean, the use of the funds in the business case is decided by council. And so it would have been there in the first place. So I would just say this, it would not be a good practice for drafting to restate something that is in the charter and legislation in a subsequent, in a bylaw or administrative order. So I haven't looked at this specifically, but I know it is our practice that where there's duplication of language, you run into a risk that if you don't copy it exactly or if something changes, then you end up with two pieces which don't necessarily align. So we would be looking to remove language which simply duplicates, the restrictions that are already in the charter or otherwise set out in the business case itself. And that's my understanding as to why this language would have been dropped out, because it's already either covered specifically in the charter or is in the business case that council has approved when it comes to the reserves.
Okay.
Thank you,
Do
John.
we have, if I may continue, or would you, Madam Chair, would you prefer that I come back? I'm over my time.
You are over your time, Councillor. But specifically to this, Councillor Cleary, did you have a comment that's specific to this conversation that you'd like to continue? Please do so.
Please. So as I read the changes and going back to when we gave direction on this a few months ago, nothing in here takes council out of the reserves, as I understand. I mean, looking at the language that's here, as has been mentioned, we still approve the business case for these. We still, are the ones who authorize monies in and out of the reserves. Staff, we have delegated to the CAO and to the executive directors and staff certain spending powers, but many of those have to be approved by us before they can go spend those things. So I do not see anything in here that takes council out of the picture. In fact, we're still very much in the picture. All we've done is give a little bit more flexibility to some of the reserves. They still have minimums and maximums, but they're more permissive, as it says in the report, rather than mandatory. So essentially what we're saying is we're not tying our own hands, but at the end of the day, it still comes back to us, and we always get a report on what the reserves are and whether we want to continue building those up or change them around. It's still very much council. Just in regard to state of emergency, I've heard it said several times, the mayor declares one. So just if you go back to the Emergency Management Act, council declares a state of emergency by resolution, or the mayor or a warden of a municipality can ask the minister to declare a state of emergency, in which case it's only in place for 7 days. It has to be renewed after 7 days. So again, when it comes to an emergency, council is very much in this, as is obviously the provincial government whose mandate is the Emergency Management Act. So I just wanted to put that back out there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. I see that our solicitor, Mr. Traves, has his hand up, and Councillor Purdy is also on the list. If we're in the same conversation, let's proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if it helps, to Councillor Cleary's point, I think there's actually a very good argument that, you're actually clarifying and further giving control to council in terms of the language around the funding emergencies, because it makes it very clear that unless there is an emergency, you don't have those powers to move and to withdraw monies. And it gives you the flexibility as a council to recognize you may not have a state of emergency, but the municipality may feel that there is an emergency in terms of funding that would require you to move monies from a reserve to borrow from them, and on what terms. And so, in fact, I think there's a better argument that it could be said that by setting this out in the administrative order, you're making it very clear that there are only specific terms that will allow you to move into and to take monies that were otherwise set aside for specific purposes. In the absence of that, those monies are held according to the reserve business case. And so I think, that is a critical piece to all of this that has been missing to date. And so that was certainly something that was set out in the charter, that you can borrow monies from reserve funds, but you have to set out the terms of those in a policy, and that's what this policy is going to do for you. So if you don't follow those terms, then I would suggest you have less of an ability to draw down on those monies for other purposes.
Thank you, Mr. Traves. Councillor Purdy, if we're still in the same conversation, or will I allow the chair to resume?
I can come back. I'm not sure if it's in the same vein.
Okay. Councillor Russell, please resume your chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. Yeah, we do see Councillor Purdy on the list. Would you like to go ahead or
Yeah, I just had a question actually, just to circle back to something you said when you were speaking. What is the risk to taxpayers by making these changes? Like worst case scenario.
I don't think there's any risk to taxpayers. It's basically governance over taxpayers' dollars in that regard. And I think, Councillor Cleary spoke quite well. Like, nothing here is restricting council's powers over reserves. It's basically, all approvals have to go through council. There's a report on here today for a capital reserve withdrawal. So I mean, just a good example to that. So the risk to the taxpayers is there's no risk. This is just about good governance. It's about how the reserves are managed, how they're reported on, how they're funded, specific uses for the fund. So and some housekeeping items. So for example, around the emergency piece, right, which was missing before. So there's no risk to the taxpayer, and any funding decisions, they all come through council as well, like through either through the budgeting process or some other initiative, whether it's external funding partnerships, etc. So everything, with reserves typically gets approved by council.
Okay, so the question in particular was when Councillor Russell said that this could potentially be a motivation to increase taxes if the maximum was taken away from the reserve. So I was just wondering if that could be clarified for me, because I don't understand the connection between having a maximum amount and the cost for taxpayers.
Yeah, I mean, you can, if you set a ceiling on a reserve, reserves are all about, it's all about planning for the future, your future projects, right? So, we went through this with the budget. We talked about our strategic initiatives and our climate plan. With respect to, what you say about tax increases, again, that all has to be approved by council. Having a maximum on a reserve certainly doesn't provide or not having a maximum on a reserve does not really have any risk to the taxpayer that, that's going to increase taxes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Purdy. Go ahead, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question is on 11A. Just unless the funding emergency has been declared, the funds can only be borrowed from the capital fund reserve. And I just want to be clear that the 3% that is for climate change, that is a separate reserve. That's not the capital fund reserve, right?
Yeah, that's correct. The climate change is in the strategic initiatives reserve.
Right. Okay, great. Thanks. I just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you, Jerry.
You're welcome.
Okay, Thank you very much. I don't see any further comments or requests for questions in the chat. So are we ready for the question on the motion?
Call for the question.
Okay, the question has been called for. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Nay. Thank you. That motion passes. The next item on the agenda is 12.2.4, increase to project CB 0002 Woodside Ferry Terminal upgrade. I'm wondering if we have a presentation on this. Do we have John McPherson with us? See Philip. And there's John. Good morning.
In favor.
John, we can't hear you. There's like absolutely no audio. You're not muted. Yep. Okay, shucks, technology. We can hear you now.
Okay. I reduced the variables. Good morning, John McPherson, Executive Director of Corporate and Customer Services. We don't have a presentation today, but staff are available to answer any questions on the report.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Can I have, let's start off, can I have someone put a motion on the floor, please? Anybody? 12.2.4.
I could do that for you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bago-Gammon.
Motion that the Audit and Finance Committee recommend the Halifax Regional Council 1, approve a transfer of $350,000 net HST included from the Capital Fund Reserve account Q526, and 2, approve an increase in multi-year funding from project number CB 000042 Woodside Ferry Terminal upgrade by $350,000 net HST included in fiscal year 22-23 as outlined in the financial implications section of this report.
Thank you. Can we have a seconder, please?
Second.
Thank you. I think Councillor Morse?
Yes, second.
Okay, super. Thank you. And I don't see any requests for questions in the chat. So all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Great, that motion passes. Thank you very much, everybody. With the adjustment to the agenda, we are now on item 12.1.1, review of the, let me see now. Yeah, let's do the review of the follow-up of the 2019 and 20 audits. The report has been circulated, and Evangeline, you are with us. I understand you have a presentation to make.
I do. Good morning. Just give me
Good
one
morning.
second and I will share my screen. Are you seeing my presentation?
Yes, but not in presentation mode.
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay. Now you can see it in presentation mode, I hope, or not.
We cannot.
Oh,
Nope, it's still showing PowerPoint. Isn't technology wonderful? Disappoints me how often I say that.
Oh, hold on. Just a sec. Getting a message about my internet connection. Bear with me. Can you now see the presentation in presentation mode?
Yes, we can. Go
Okay,
ahead.
perfect. Technology is great when it works. Good morning. I'm pleased to be here today to talk to you about follow-up results from 3 reports that my office released in 2019 and 2020. The LED streetlight conversion project, HRM's new website project, and fleet vehicle use, car allowance, and mileage. There were 11 recommendations across 3 reports. 64% are complete. This is below the level that we expect for audits that were released 2 years ago. Neither of the 2 recommendations related to large capital projects resulting from the LED project are complete. 1 recommendation related to HRM's website project was complete, and there was only 1 recommendation in that report. The fleet vehicle use audit had 8 recommendations. All 4 directed to Halifax Water are complete. 2 of the 4 directed to HRM business units are complete, and 2 are outstanding. The percentage complete is down overall. This is the second follow-up review where that's been the case. The June 2021 had a 63% completion rate. So we have heard from management in their responses to both that June 2021 follow-up and today's that COVID has contributed to challenges in completing recommendations. We understand certainly that COVID obviously has an impact on operations. However, at times when staff are working from home, not able to necessarily be in the office, potentially having, all of the additional pressures that came along with the first 2 years of the pandemic in our lives, controls and having strong policies in place can be even more important in organizations. So it's important to have those things in place and that they be regularly followed. So addressing known issues that are outstanding is important. We will soon begin follow-up of all of the outstanding recommendations up to that June 2021 follow-up report to see how many of them have been completed since we initially reported on them. So I'll walk you through the individual audits. The LED streetlight conversion project audit had 2 recommendations, and both of those related to large capital projects. Both are incomplete. Recommendation 1 dealt with developing a comprehensive risk assessment process to plan significant capital projects. Management identified some steps that they have taken to us. For example, an enterprise risk management framework has been approved. However, it's not been implemented. There's now a capital prioritization framework for capital budget, but that relates to aligning projects with regional council priorities, and it doesn't necessarily address the risk of large capital projects. The procurement template requires considering procurement risks, but again, that doesn't address overall project risk. Management told us COVID delayed initiatives. However, significant capital projects, such as the Cogswell interchange, are moving forward. And it is concerning that a comprehensive process was not in place for the start of large projects such as this. Recommendation 2 deals with developing a policy on who is responsible for an overall capital project file when there are multiple business units involved, as well as what documents must be kept in project records. Management told us this was to be part of some SAP work that has been delayed. An SAP upgrade should not be needed to establish what must form part of a main project file. You should be able to indicate sort of key items for a file. And once an SAP update is in place, then the policy or the process could be updated to indicate which of those documents should be filed in SAP and retained electronically in that manner. We have had a number of audits that have shown that the existing corporate records policy is not leading to adequate files on projects. Information is often in individual staff email accounts. It can be time-consuming or difficult to locate, and it may not be accessible at all if the employee has left HRM. HRM's new website project audit had a single recommendation that dealt with adequate testing of the new parking system, and that has been implemented. The fleet vehicle use car allowance and mileage audit had 8 recommendations. 4 were directed to Halifax Water and are complete. That includes recs related to historical unreported taxable benefits, selecting the most cost-effective option for local travel, reviewing light-duty fleet vehicles for opportunities to reduce fleet, and developing targets and monitoring for fleet vehicle utilization. 2 of the 4 recommendations to HRM business units are complete. They relate to historical and unreported taxable benefits and updating the local travel policy to require picking the most cost-effective option. 2 remain outstanding. One deals with updating the fleet use policy, and the other with monitoring light fleet utilization and developing targets. For what's up next, our next follow-up will involve looking at the building permits and inspections audit. And as I mentioned at the outset, we will also follow up recommendations previously assessed as incomplete up to audits that were done about mid-2019. We'll look to see if the downward trend in completed recommendations continues or if that's something that trends back upwards again. And just a suggestion to Audit and Finance Standing Committee in terms of outstanding recommendations or recommendations coming from new audits. You may wish to think about requesting action plans from management for all recommendations and requiring some sort of regular periodic status reporting on that. It is considered a good practice for oversight. And finally, I'd just like to say thanks to HRM staff and business units. They're always helpful when we're completing our work, and thanks to the OAG staff that worked on this assignment as well. And that concludes my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing. And I would be happy to try to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay. Thank you very much, Evangeline. Councillor Morse.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Mr. Chair. Thank you. And thank you, Evangeline. I just wanted to describe a situation that came up with LED lights, and maybe I could ask you about what happened there and why you think that there's such a problem with our streetlight conversion project. I had a resident very concerned about lighting around in Clayton Park around the Lacewood Dunbrack intersection, if people can picture that. It's quite a significant commercial area with a big Sobeys and Shoppers Drug Mart, McDonald's, Tim's, so it's a busy spot. And this resident was complaining that the lighting wasn't very good. And he was right. I took it to staff and they said that this area had some of the first LED lights in the city, that they were sort of experimental at the time and they hadn't been replaced, and the levels didn't meet standards. And this particular intersection has a high level of collisions. And so I would have thought that it would have been highlighted as one that should have been handled, early on if we're prioritizing according to, objective data involving collisions, that this would have already been fixed. The other thing I found curious about it was that the staff person had to go out with a light meter, a light meter to measure the light levels. And I would have thought that they would know which ones had been fixed and when and all of that sort of thing, that we would have some sort of record of how and when they had been upgraded. But they seem to require, have to do this through a manual test with a lux meter. So anyway, I've just put that out there. I don't understand, if you could maybe explain a little bit about why you think it's taking so long to implement this project and what some of the issues are that perhaps we can address.
Okay, so I don't think it's, some of your question may be better put to staff, but from my perspective, from when we did this audit, the project was complete at that stage in time. There may be ongoing improvements that would be needed or issues with lighting and so on, but the project at that point in time was completed. And the goal of our audit was to look at the project itself, whether or not it had been managed well, looked at appropriate risks and so on, and whether or not it was managed in a way that would maximize the savings from LED lights, because that was one of the initiatives of the project. And overall, from a project perspective, the results of the audit were reasonably positive in that there was policies in place to manage the conversion and so on. It was really the planning stages and addressing those risks of large scale projects that we had issues with, as well as accessing some documentation, which led to the recommendation related to the files. So I don't know if staff might be able to help you more with that one, but that actually looking at the lighting itself wasn't the purpose of the audit.
Okay, all right. My mistake. Thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Morse. Go ahead, Councillor Hensby.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. LED streetlights, my question annually is about those gray lights or the ghost lights out there. There's still a discrepancy between the amount of streetlights that are out in the areas versus what HRM has registered as their lights versus the lights that Nova Scotia Power has assigned to customers on a power bill. Well, there's still gray lights out there that are on nobody's property power bill and not registered with us municipality. Back in the day when we had area rates for streetlights, we had more discretion of having the lights installed where necessary. So some private roads that still have public services go on them, like fire and bus services and stuff like that, or school bus service and garbage, they had lighting on it. But now we have made the claim, well, we're not taking over any of these lights on private roads, but we still have a lot of lights out there. Plus, I have some other lights still out there on municipal properties, and we still got the high pressure sodium bulbs out there, and the LED conversion still hasn't been done. So I guess there's a discrepancy in regards to that gray list. So I don't know where it stands. The list of streetlights that have not been assigned ownership to anybody yet.
And that is
Evangeline, I'm not.
Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
I wasn't sure if this was in relation to your report or if this would be better addressed through TPW.
I understand it's an operational matter, but I wasn't sure if the audit reviewed in regards to how they determined what was to be municipal quote unquote streetlights in the conversion versus Nova Scotia Power, or the ones that have not yet been determined. I'd like to know what kind of audit procedure was to review that process.
The audit focused on the management of the project itself. That was its purpose when we set out, so it wouldn't necessarily have looked at that. We did have an area in there where we looked at conversations management had with Nova Scotia Power that had to do with the fixed rate to actual usage rates in terms of energy usage and so on. So I don't think it related to the matter that you've referenced. I think that one would be better put to staff.
Okay, thank you very much, Evangeline. Thank you, Councillor Hensby. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you,
and
Chair.
welcome to the meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Evangeline, for your work on all the stuff that you do. I always feel like I need to make this sort of disclaimer, which I know you're aware of, which is you're the only municipal auditor general in Atlantic Canada, and so. The fact that this stuff gets reported and people get to see what's happening is a good thing. It also means we're not the only municipality that has issues that probably should be audited. We're the only ones that actually do it. And so, but the key is the follow-up, for sure. I remember when we hired you, and I think you said this publicly, that you're not going to make dozens of recommendations when you do a study. That you're going to make a few well thought out, reasoned recommendations, and that you would expect that they would be followed up. So the fact that we have two in one area is a bit of a concern. I guess what I'm asking, two things. Number one is, what is your level of concern? And number two, and this is more about learning from the LED the streetlights in particular, learning from that in terms of how it affects other capital projects and making sure that we have risk assessment and policies to deal with these. But what would sort of generally be your level of concern? But secondly, is there a timeline that you've been given in terms of when we would actually have this done now that COVID is hopefully mostly in the rearview mirror?
Okay. if I miss any of that as I respond, please let me know. Yes, so certainly high priority recommendations are my approach. I don't focus on things that are small items. I focus on the significant ones. I mean, I think there's a couple of things here. This is the second report in a row where the follow-up completion rate has dropped from quite a bit over 80% to mid 60s, just below, 63, 64%. So I think that's concerning, and there can be a lot of reasons for that, and COVID could be one of them. It's also possible that, the recommendations aren't being tracked closely enough, or that there's not enough of a focus on them to fix those known issues. So I think it would be important for management to sort of look at the reasons for that, and perhaps for yourselves as a committee or regional council to look at the reasons for that. In terms of the level of concern specifically related to the LED one, I mean, those were really recs directed to something much broader than the LED project. They deal with large capital projects. And I would say, it's very concerning that that's not been addressed with large scale projects such as Cogswell underway, and other things. I mean, the municipality has a lot of large initiatives underway or on the horizon, and having a solid process where you're really doing a good risk assessment at the outset, before you've committed too much into there, is really important. And yes, perhaps some things didn't get done during COVID or had to fall by the wayside because of COVID, but having a robust risk assessment for large capital projects is very important. And to me, that would rise to one of the things that should be completed regardless of the situation. In terms of a timeline, I would think with the large capital projects underway that those things should be completed, very soon. And the item about the project files, I mean, I know auditors talk about documentation all the time, and sometimes it gets pushed to the side as, oh, it's just documentation. But if you can't find key pieces of information that support how you got to a point, that support things like, how do we calculate what we were going to save or what this was going to cost? If that lives in someone's email or their personal HRM drives that only they can access, and then they leave and it's not put in some central file, then you no longer have that information and you're losing that corporate knowledge. So I think both of those recs are, very key to a very broad range of projects, unlike some recs, which are more directed towards, like the fleet one, for example. Those recs, yes, they're important. I wouldn't have made them if they weren't, but they're very much directed to, a single area, whereas those capital project ones are a much broader, larger area.
And Evangeline, just very quickly, Chair, these would have been accepted at the time by management, the recommendations?
Yes, that is correct.
I do see Jerry. I don't know if Jerry wanted to say anything, Chair, or if that's not really my place to call upon people, but I did see his beautiful face pop up. I don't know if you had anything to say on that.
Thank
Go ahead,
you,
Jerry.
Mr. Mayor. I always thought I had a face for radio, but I'll take that compliment. Yeah, just a couple overall things, and I certainly, the Madam Auditor General makes some good points with respect to risk management around capital projects, and certainly I think there is some good ideas and some work that needs to take place around this for sure, but I don't think it's all too bad. We do have an enterprise risk management program that each business unit goes through business planning, and each business unit has a risk register. We need to probably formalize that a little bit more, that program to specific capital projects. There is a prioritization process, which the AG mentioned, which aligns with council priorities. There, I would say there is an element of risk management that is associated with that work. But, one of the things, and I mean, I know I'm not speaking for, Brad with the Cogswell project or the CAO, but, On these bigger projects, I know I'm on as CFO on 3 steering committees. So, Cogswell has an executive steering committee that meets regularly, that, certainly discusses the project. Risk is something that's discussed there, as well as with the Business Foundation's technical project. And I'm also on the transit technical project. So there are three big, enterprise projects that certainly has a level of executive oversight and stewardship there. So, that wasn't mentioned in the report, but certainly there is, risk management is there. We do need to maybe formalize this a bit better in practice, and certainly I'm committed to take that forward and work with the CAO and the DCAOs and executive to bring this into fruition. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jerry. Go ahead, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Evangeline. I'm curious, the AG does the job, does the audit, makes the recommendations, and holding people accountable to the recommendations and the follow-up is a role of the Audit and Finance Committee. And I know we spoke previously that there was some training for Audit and Finance Committees just around response to audits that I'm hoping we'll be able to maybe do something along that line. The recommendation around when an audit comes to us to ask for an action plan. I know sometimes that is received a little bit like, oh, well, you're, a little bit of pressure, but that is what we need to do, is to ask for an action plan and then to follow up. And I think that if this committee, if we do that, have the action plans, look at the follow-ups, ask people to come in and then be accountable if it's not being met in process, that might help with increasing the efficiency and the response rate in terms of people being able to meet their recommendations. So in these, these are new ones for me as a new counselor and new on the committee, but I do hope and wonder how, Mr. Chair, we can, maybe Evangeline, you can help us figure out how to ensure some of that training, ensure some of that education and awareness, and then for us to just be accountable to the information then that we have and do our due diligence. So that would be great. And I would say it is a little unnerving, because it does seem that there's a little bit of a culture around documentation that needs to change. Sometimes think, well, yes, it's in my head or it's over there. And we need to try to work to resolve that culture around just how important the documentation is. And sometimes it's not from the top down. Sometimes that information that you really need may be, right at the grassroots, and as it moves up, you need to make sure that you find it. So working with, improving a culture around the importance of documentation, I think would be helpful. So that's my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. I wasn't sure if you were going to go down the road of asking for a follow-up or not. Evangeline, would you like to respond to Councillor Daigle-Gammon?
I'll make a couple of comments, if that's okay. In relation to the training, we had talked about that previously, and I had mentioned to you that there was some work being done at an organization that I'm involved with called CAAF, which is who provided the in-person training the last time. They're working on some online modules. I know that you had expressed an interest in it being in person. And so the online modules are almost complete now. I believe they will be within the next little bit. And once they are, I can pursue whether or not any of that could be delivered in an in-person capacity with that organization for sure, and pass that information back to Audit and Finance Standing Committee. And in terms of, the culture of documentation is not as important. I do think that is an important thing as an organization. A lot of our audits have found that there isn't adequate documentation, or we do these things, we meet, we have these discussions. Yes, we need to write it down better. On large projects that can take years in particular, that stuff is exacerbated because people can come and go. The players, both on HRM's end and on contractors' ends, can come and go. And sometimes folk just might not remember what was talked about. There might not be anybody to remember what was talked about 2 or 3 years ago. And so I think that highlights the importance of documenting that information.
Agreed. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Gammon. Go ahead, Councillor Morse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just following up a bit on Councillor Daigle-Gammon's comments there about action plans. Is this a circumstance with the LED streetlights that it would make sense for us to ask for reporting on it from staff, where it gets at a different level of reporting, where we're looking at whether the streetlights are being fixed and when the new lights are being installed on schedule and to the degree that we want them installed and that we're achieving our goals with this conversion project? Is this a situation where this committee should ask for an action plan like that?
Sorry, just to be clear, is that a question for me?
Well, for you, if you're able to
members?
comment, and also for my fellow committee members, I guess.
Okay, so maybe I'll just start by saying that it's certainly a best practice for oversight or groups like council, like Audit and Finance Standing Committee, is to ask for action plans and then to get some sort of periodic reporting on those prior to an Auditor General coming back and following up, which is usually, ours are 18 months. Some AGs follow up after 2 years, some after 3 years, it depends. And so that provides you your independent assurance that, you know, what management have told you about throughout that reporting process is correct. Then whether or not you want to, I guess, continue getting updates on older recs that haven't been implemented would entirely be up to the committee. And whether or not certainly you wanted to extend it to things that were beyond the audit wouldn't be my place, I don't think, to say. I think that would be up to committee members to discuss and decide upon.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to also comment on this, if I may. I can either do that with the indulgence of the committee, or I can ask Councillor Daigle-Gammon to step in again.
I'm sure, Mr. Chair, you're fine.
Okay, thank you. I would also like to see a follow-up on this and an action plan. I recognize the value of discussing risk and making sure that projects that we are working on at this point have that thorough discussion. But it is difficult to have a comprehensive, knowledgeable, thorough, deep discussion on risk without knowing where you are on a fine level and having the documentation to support what you are doing, and also to recognize and confirm what you have done, is something that absolutely, in my mind, in my experience, in my background of dealing with insurance and all of the other matters that I've dealt with, is absolutely essential. If you don't document something, the saying goes, then it didn't happen. And what I would like to see is more recognition at a systemic level of the importance of documentation, and if that has to, whatever form it goes down to make sure that the importance of it is recognized. My preference would be to see or an action plan as a result of this follow-up, but nobody has asked for that yet, and I'm hoping that someone will. So I will leave my comments at that. Thank you very much. And go ahead, Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I had to switch computers again. You know,
I agree with you that I would like to see something. I'm not sure if it's an action plan per se, because we're very well removed from this particular project. In spite of what Councillor Moore said, I mean, there are still some issues to deal with in terms of LED street lighting, but it's not the project that it was before when we were changing from the old, high pressure sodium and whatnot to the LEDs. But I have posted in the chat a motion which deals with actually specifically what the AG has been talking about and the recommendations that have not been implemented. And my concern is that we move away from this and it is all about the LED project. And in my mind, we have major projects ongoing and coming up, and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in projects. When I think about electric buses, when I think about rapid transit, when I think about Cogswell, we're talking about massive amounts of public money. And I can't imagine those projects can continue, or the ones that haven't started yet start, without the kind of documentation and plan that we're hoping and frankly requiring from governments today. And so my motion, and I would like some feedback from both our staff and council colleagues, would be that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee direct the CAO to provide a staff report on, one, developing a comprehensive risk assessment process for planning significant capital projects, and two, developing policy related to significant capital project files.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. Thank
you. And just, I've spoken already about it, but I think we, and Mr. Blackwood spoke to this a little bit, but the words were, around, well, we are thinking about these things. We probably have to, write them down a little bit better. We need to, make our policies more concrete. Well, yeah, we do. And so I think what I'm talking about here is essentially taking what the critique has been in the follow-up audit and saying, you know what, it hasn't been done yet. So we need to develop those policies and we need to have a framework around how that is going to happen. Thank you. Oh, you're muted.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Cleary. Crystal, I see you have popped up on the screen. I also saw that John was there. So go ahead, Crystal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Crystal Nallen, Director of Asset Management, through you to the councillor. I would like to clarify a few things, because I know we've been speaking in broad terms, and there has been actually significant work that has been done by several areas. The full recommendations are marked incomplete, but that does not mean that no work has been done on either one. First of all, with the capital prioritization framework, which is brought forward every year during the capital budget cycle since 2019, after the initial audit report came out, Ms. Coleman-Sod said it only aligns to council priorities, but as we present to council, it actually reviews alignment to strategic alignment. It assesses strategic alignment to council priorities. It assesses impact to the service, which is a value for money dynamic on every new project. And first and foremost, it assesses risk for every new project. And when you look at the decision matrices that we employ for each of those items, on the risk side, we we evaluate each project from a scale of 1 to 5 on 8 different types of risk. So each project is assessed during planning before we bring it to you for consideration in the capital budget. The fourth item in that prioritization framework is the capacity to deliver, which is, as you'll be aware of, our assessment on what is the readiness for that project to proceed when we bring it to you in year 1 or year 2. Is it ready to, if we're going to approve tax dollars against it, is it ready to move forward? Jerry had mentioned earlier the enterprise risk framework, which has been thoroughly reviewed and it's aligned to the capital prioritization framework. There's also been an update since 2019 in the procurement policy to ensure that any increases that a cumulative of 20% or $20,000 in a capital project gets brought forward to council for review and approval. From the and then going through the projects, we have done a great amount of improvements on the capital projections that are reviewed and updated and included in the quarterly financial package that's brought to audit and finance and then to council each quarter. And as Jerry mentioned, we do have a number of significant capital project steering committees which engage the leadership and the key stakeholders in those key capital projects to manage it throughout the process. There is one more element that was outlined by management in 2019 to help manage the planning and management of capital projects that are high dollars and complex that we have not been able to implement at this time because of staffing capacity throughout COVID. Those other elements have greatly reduced the amount of risk associated with capital project planning. And I don't want any of this committee to feel like we have not been having our focus on risk mitigation around the value of the dollars that are invested into our capital projects. There is a lot of time spent on this. From the documentation point of view, other than the corporate documentation retention policy that is in place, there has not been a formal policy that has been put in place into the specific details. And we need to work with the Auditor General's office to try to understand what pieces of information they feel is missing. Currently, staff have a robust process in place to keep all their procurement documentation, including contract documentation, and those evaluation processes that are put in place for transparency around equity of that piece. Financial modeling that is done for these very large projects, there is a significant amount of assumption documentation that happens there. Of course, all financial invoicing and payment documentation is kept on file for regulation, accounting, and those forms of requirements that way. So we haven't addressed a specific policy, and we will work closely with Ms. Coleman-Sod's team to further understand what specific pieces of documentation they feel are missing. We feel the very large and key legal documents are being documented and filed and kept appropriately. So I hope this helps provide a bit of context on kind of the scale of what we're talking about.
Okay. Thank you, Crystal.
If I could just comment on something towards the end there.
Go ahead.
So a couple of things. As part of follow-up, it's a review, not an audit. So we aren't going back and looking at the project in great detail. We are asking management for management's assessment of whether or not recommendations are complete, and this, these recs were assessed as incomplete. In relation to sort of the closing comments there about what information we feel is missing, I wanted to make a couple of points. Firstly, We don't make the policies, that's management's job. Our job is to look at the implementation of policy. So it's not our place to say what key documents are required in HRM files. That's HRM's management's place to determine that and to determine what key documents are needed, to find a way of communicating that to staff and management that need to know that, and then make sure that that's what's happening. In terms of specific work that we have done, where we have had issues with documentation, that's well detailed in previous audit reports. And in addition to what yourselves and the public would see on an individual audit report, we have detailed findings that we share with management. So this would be on an audit by audit basis. And certainly whenever we have a comment about not being able to find information as a result of an audit, management that were involved in that audit know exactly what we could not find, because they've been provided with a very detailed list of findings that would provide that information. So whether or not there are some changes that have been made sort of in more recent times, that, you know, if we looked at an audit that was a project that was started 6 months ago, would all of that documentation be there? I don't know, because I haven't audited those things. I can only speak to the things that I have looked at. And documentation has been a consistent issue on a number of audits, and some of it has related to large capital projects.
Thank you very much, Evangeline, for providing that. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to make sure I'm okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I can support Councillor Cleary's motion. I think it makes sense. I also don't expect that we have, I wouldn't want people to think that every project that we have, that the risk isn't considered. Every staff report that we get, every piece of correspondence we get to committees or to council has got risk consideration listed, at least has to be dealt with. Sometimes it says the risks have been considered and not considered seriously. Sometimes it refers to reports where the risk was considered. So I think we do. I think, as Jerry and Crystal said, we do a pretty good job of assessing that. But you can't have a report come to this committee as a follow-up where 2 recommendations are made and the follow-up after a significant period of time is not complete enough. We need to answer that. We need to make sure that we're doing the work of this committee, and so I think that this motion is perfectly in order and probably sensible. I know every time that an Auditor General makes a report that people are looking for the worst possible outcome, and sometimes that puts a lot of pressure on staff who are doing great work. That's not what I want to do, but I do think as a committee that we need to follow this up and get a written response and discussion at this committee. I think that's what we need to do. So I would support that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Go ahead, Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, so just to follow up on what the mayor said, and also what Ms. Nowlin said, I certainly recognize staff does a tremendous amount of work. And I think based on Ms. Nowlin's response and the AG's response to that, it shouldn't take, I think, a whole lot of work to formalize this and sort of, if you want to think about an analogy, wrap it up, put a bow on it, and bring it back to us. I think we're nearly there. It's just a matter of formalizing it, tightening it up, and making sure that the documentation is there, that the risks are enumerated, that they're quantified, and not just for staff, but for us, for the public, and doing that in a transparent way. And I think that's what we're talking about here. So I hope staff doesn't take offense to my motion. It's really just a matter of saying, based on where we are and where we're going in terms of the sheer volume of projects and the amount of dollars going out to them, I think it's necessary for us to, dot every I, cross every T, and make sure that, we've got things as tight as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cleary. Councillor Daigle-Gannon, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor Cleary, for the motion too. I do support it. If you hadn't come with that, I probably would have asked for a follow-up on what the plan is to meet the recommendations, which is very similar to what you have in the motion. And thank you, Crystal Mellon, for your comments, because they give such good confidence. Not that it wasn't there again, it's just, I agree with Councillor Cleary that it seems that the report and the follow-up should, based on your very competent answer, it should be a quick one, and it will be able to answer a lot of the questions that we have and address, you know, what the gap is in terms of one of those pieces of policy that you have the question about. So I look forward to it, and I think it shouldn't be too long before we'll get to see this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Daigle-Gavin. I don't see any further speakers in the chat, so are we ready for the question? And it seems like we are. Just as a reminder, the motion that's on the floor is that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee direct the CAO to provide a staff report on 1, developing a comprehensive risk assessment process for planning significant capital projects, and 2, developing policy related to significant capital project files. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, that motion passes. And I don't have any further speakers on the list for the Auditor General. So thank you very much, Evangeline, for your presentation this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for Crystal and Jerry. The next item on the agenda is item 12.2.1, humanitarian relief efforts for Ukraine. And Mr. Mayor, I'm wondering if you'd like to speak to this.
Yeah, I'll put it on the floor if I could and say a couple of words on it, if that's appropriate.
Go ahead.
All right.
I can paste it into the chat if that would help. Or
no, it's recommended that Audit and Finance Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council provide a $50,000 grant from the Options Reserve Q421 to the Canada-Ukraine Foundation to support humanitarian relief efforts for Ukraine as a result of the invasion by Russia.
Second.
thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Morse. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, so this is fairly self-evident in some ways. I think we've all been appalled as we've been watching what's happened in Ukraine, a completely unwarranted war, a violent attack on a country. The images speak for themselves. I'm not going to recount them, but I think we've all been repulsed by what we've seen. And I think peace-loving democratic countries, but even some non-democratic countries, I think have been appalled by what they've seen and have responded. We have a Ukrainian population here. I've seen a number of you at some of the rallies that have happened. The Ukrainian Canadian Congress is the group in Nova Scotia that have organized a number of these rallies. The report indicates that they're not directly accepting donations from the public for a bunch of reasons, but they're recommending that if we support this, that it would go to the Canada-Ukraine Foundation. And so that, you know, there's a number of different avenues where we could support. There's the Red Cross appeal. There's other ones as well. My key thing was I wanted staff to talk to the local folks here who have organized the rally, who have spoken out about what impact this is having on them. You know, I've at one of the rallies talked to somebody whose father had just come over from Ukraine after being stuck in Poland for a couple of days. It's a small amount of money. The province has donated $100,000. I recognize that there are some people that say it's not really a municipal mandate, or it's not a provincial mandate, or either. And it's not the mandate of individual companies or individuals who are supporting Ukraine. But I think that this is a symbolic and important step for us as a city to say we recognize what's happening to the people of Ukraine. And I think it would mean a lot to them that the city steps up and plays a small role, similar to the way we did with Lebanon back in the summer of 2020. the explosion of August, I think the 5th or 6th, which had an impact on us here as well. So that's really what I wanted to say. I was interested in seeing what staff would come back on a recommendation in terms of where money might go. I appreciate the work that has been done by staff. I don't know if we have anybody who helped to write this or anybody who could speak to it. Connor, is that you now?
Yes, indeed. Hi, folks. It's great to see you all. Yeah, so I'm a very poor proxy for Mr. Paul Johnson filling in for him right now, but we did work together on this. I mean, a significant amount of what we looked at, of course, was looking at the Red Cross co-funding by the Fed government, which was over. But we also, when we talked to the Ukrainian folks there, it was quite clear that the direct support through the CUS, or the Canada-Ukraine Fund, was really the way to get the most tangible relief provided to folks over there, and that's why we did go with that recommendation after digging into a bunch of different options across the board.
Yeah, thank you. You get around, man. It's good to see you back. Thank you. Happy to see you on the screen. So thank you, Chair. That's what I wanted to say was what's the best place to put it? We're supporting humanitarian work. Obviously, the Government of Canada is supporting militarily through lethal and non-lethal, as well as humanitarian and diplomatic efforts. The provincial government made their contribution, and I'm hoping that in the name and with our thoughts closely held to the Ukrainian people, and particularly in concert with those of Ukrainian descent here in Halifax and who still have family over there, that this is something that the city could do. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I don't see any further speakers in the chat. Are we ready for the question? The question has been called. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you very much. That motion passes. Sorry that took so long. The next items on the agenda are 12.3 Grants Committee. There is nothing from their committee members. There is nothing from their motions. There's nothing from there. There is no in-camera piece today. We have no added items. Notices of motion. Nobody is stepping forward with a notice of motion, so thank you. Public participation. Just as a reminder for folks online, there are no registered speakers for today. The deadline to register was 4:30 p.m. on the business day prior to this meeting, so that would have been yesterday, Tuesday, April 19th, and nobody had signed up at that time. The date of the next meeting on this calendar is May 18th, 2022, and can I get a motion to adjourn, please? I see Councillor Hensby has given a thumbs up for adjournment, so thank you very much, Councillor Hensby. We stand adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Krista, for stepping in and helping clerk the meeting today.